Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. Where I am at the moment, it's a bit wet and it's been raining. I'm sure it's the same up and down the country today. So we are here today just to make sure that you're on the right the webinar to talk about legacy fundraising during a pandemic. And we're with you today for around about an hour or so. And I will be co-presenting with my colleague Dan, who you can't see at the moment, but we're hoping he's going to pop up in a second. And we've also got some panelists that have kindly volunteered their time today to share their experience in terms of legacy fundraising during the pandemic, which I'm sure all of us will find invaluable. You can just see their names at the bottom there. So I'm going to go on to the first slide. It's going to work. Thank you. So we're going to do a bit of an introduction first of all, just in terms of what we're all about, and then we're going to go on and sort of go into the more meaty part of the presentation, which is looking at actual motivations for legacy giving and the current legacy giving climate. Then we're going to have a panel discussion with the experienced fundraisers that were their names were shown at the beginning of the presentation. And then we're going to have 20 minutes of open questions. So we'd really like for that to be as interactive as possible and for as many people as we can to really participate. So we have a really interesting conversation and you get as much out of this as you can. So that will be the last session. So just to briefly start and talk about the firm that Dan and I work for those of you who haven't heard of us, I'm sure a lot of you have been to our webinars before, but we work for a firm called Kingston, who are predominantly an audit firm, and we order a lot of the third sector. We actually have over 700 charity clients, and we have various offices scattered around the UK, but we're also in 112 countries, so we're very much a global firm. And the firm has won various different awards concerning their audit. As part of the firm as well, there are many consultancy services that we offer, and the one I'm involved in is Kingston Fundraising and Management. So you can see a delightful picture there of me at the bottom of the screen, and Dan. So I work with Dan, and we advise charities, small, medium and large, on a variety of different aspects of their fundraising. So it could be establishing a case for support for them, or refining a case for support, or really looking at their strategy and making some recommendations with regard to that. We also have a finance team, and they will look at things like cost recovery for an organisation, and business model development, and funding reviews as well. And last but not least, we have the impact team, and the impact team really help charities to understand their impact and allocate resources effectively. So if you are interested in any of these services that we offer, please do get in contact with us, and we'd be delighted to talk to you. Just some key things before we get to the meaty part of the webinar. Just to say, we've got lots and lots coming up that may be of interest to you or your colleagues. So on the left-hand side of the screen there, you can see various different webinars that we've got coming up in the next few weeks. The first one's going to be presented by my colleagues in the finance team, and the second by our impact team. And on the right are some of the webinars that we've recorded that happened in the past, but they're available to download. So please do download them if you think that would be of interest to you. And we also have a free 30-minute consultation for anyone that's interested and would like some advice from us about any aspect of their charity. So do keep that in mind. Dan, are you on the call? If I can hear.
I hope so. Can you hear me now?
Oh, fantastic. Yes. Apologies to everyone. We were having a few technical problems at the beginning, so I wasn't entirely sure I'd be able to get to him, but glad you're with us, Dan. So I wondered if you could just say hello and talk about the Twitter
Yes,
feed.
so just very briefly, for those of you who tweet, feel free to use the MKSFM Let's Talk hashtag. We've only recently started using it with our webinars, but we're sort of trying to encourage people to share thoughts and ideas that they have from these webinars through Twitter, and we'll try and keep an eye on those as we go through the session, but also respond to anything outside of the session as well. So yeah, feel free to tweet away, and if we can, we'll respond to that in real time as well. Thanks very much.
Fantastic. Thanks, Dan. So let's talk about legacies during a pandemic. So first of all, we're going to talk about motivations for leaving a legacy. And I think it's really helpful to consider why people leave gifts in their will to charities prior to commencing a legacy marketing campaign, because there'll be different motivations, and you may want to consider really angling your marketing campaign about those motivations that may resonate specifically for your charity. So it's worth considering them before you think about what the ask needs to be. So here, my maths is right, I've listed 7 motivations for an individual to leave a gift in their will. So just to kind of expand on these, to kind of explain it in a bit more detail. So the first motivation might be because the motivation is that for the prospective legator, the charity presents a positive vision. So it's worth thinking about, does your charity have a strong aspirational, importantly long-term vision that people want to be part of? So for example, the MS Society has a really strong vision of stopping MS within a 10-year period. It's called the Stop MS Appeal. I'm sure lots of you have heard of it, but something like that which is really ambitious and long-term is something that might resonate with supporters. The second one is helping others like me. So it's a bit sort of, I've been in their shoes in terms of the beneficiaries of the charity. The cause is relatable to the donor. So it might be something like Dyslexia UK to someone who has it and can relate to others and wants to help them. The next one is around enabling high impact. So it's around, can you demonstrate that your gift as an organisation can go a really long way? Can that legacy gift really reach lots of people? The next one is around payback for help that the individual may have received themselves. So for example, I used to work for a charity called Place to Be, who provided counselling for children, and it was hoped that if a child received counselling at a young age, they were able to prosper later on in life. So for a charity like Place to Be, that sense of payback may come in terms of someone has been able to benefit from something at an early age, and they feel like they want to kind of give back to the charity later on in life. Trust in the charity. It's confidence that the charity is going to deliver what they say they're going to deliver. Being remembered well. An individual wants to be remembered fondly by others, and this will actually come up in the next slide when we look at the current given climate, and there's some opportunity there in terms of legacy fundraising. And in memory of others, I'm sure Tracy will talk about this when we go on to the panel discussion. This motivation will definitely resonate with the hospice movement. So it's this idea of a family member who's received excellent care in a hospice. Perhaps the next of kin might consider leaving a donation in their will because they've had that good experience of someone they love having received really excellent care. And one thing I think to note is that those who leave donations in memory of someone are actually more likely to leave a legacy in their will. So it's worth thinking about that when you're thinking about prospective audiences to go to who might be potential legators for your organisation. So that's motivation. That's a bit of a whistle-stop tour in terms of motivations to leave a gift in a will. Now to the more kind of timely stuff, given the pandemic. I wanted to spend a bit of time talking about a branch of social science called terror management theory. and as it's really linked to legacy giving and the opportunities that are linked to this income stream, particularly in the current climate. Now, for those of you who've not heard of this before, terror management theory concerns how people respond to terror or awareness for their own mortality. And basically the theory says that people do one of two things, the first being avoidance. So like to think of that sort of analogy, and I put that on the slide deck there, around an ostrich, of kind of putting their head in the sand. I'm sure we've all been guilty of that at some point in our lives, in terms of that avoidance of even thinking about their own mortality, and really suspending their beliefs, which is obviously not so great news for legacy fundraising. However, the really good news for legacy fundraising is that some people adopt the second approach when faced with their own mortality, and they become more like owls. So they're alert and looking around, and they really want to find ways to live on, and what they might do actively to ensure their beliefs live on after they die. And people often find ways of doing this through a legacy for a cause they believe in. Now, the key thing here to remember is that because of everything we're faced now in terms of the pandemic, and we are faced, unfortunately, with daily death figures, people are becoming a lot more aware of their own immortality. So in a way, there are definitely more owls out there. So there's really a great opportunity there for charities to make the most of those owls, and find ways to market that to them, because there's an audience there that will want to make sure that their beliefs live on. And how can you make sure that individual picks your charity? But there's definitely an opportunity there. So the next bit of my section before I hand over to Dan is looking at the current legacy giving climate. So just in terms of where we are and what the forecast looks like on a national basis. So this isn't specific charities, this is nationally, but I'm hoping this will be helpful to everyone. So if we look at the overall predictions in terms of legacy fundraising, just to kind of, I guess, set some sort of context here, legacy income is actually determined by two factors. So it's the volume of gifts, and what I mean by that is the number of people leaving a gift in their will, and also it's impacted by the value of gifts. So the value of gifts is impacted by the economy and the house price and the stock market and so forth. And some of you may have already seen this within your own charities, but it is likely that legacy income will drop in the short term as the value of gifts are lower than expected due to the downturn of the economy. However, long-term prospects do look better. And Legacy Foresight, who I've cited on this presentation, predicts that medium-term legacy income is actually expected to grow, increasing from 3.4 billion last year to 3.5 to 3.9 billion in 2024. And the rationale for this is it's largely due to volume of gifts going up. So sadly, as more people are passing away, more people there are more legacies out there. But importantly, there are more people deciding to leave a gift in their will because of this idea of symbolic immortality that I referred to on the last slide. People want to be remembered. Value of gifts is slightly less reliable because of the economic situation, but it is thought that the volume of gifts will outweigh the negative impacts of the value of gifts, generating a greater yield. So some positive news there in terms of the projection of gifts moving forward. And now Dan is going to talk to us about how to position the ask in legacy fundraising during the pandemic. So Dan, I will pass over to you. Are you okay to? I think you're on mute, Dan, actually, if you could.
Okay.
Yep.
Emma, I'm not able to move the slide, so you'll need to do that.
Yep, that's fine. I'm there.
Great. So just some sort of thoughts just to round up our initial introduction to legacy giving before we go to our panel. I see there's some questions and comments already appearing in the chat. If you want to put anything to the Q&A as well, that would be great. And then we're able to build those into the conversations with our panelists a bit later. But for now, just sort of 4 things to think about when positioning how you ask people to leave a legacy in their will for your charity. First thing is obviously about sensitivity, but then we always need to be sensitive about asking people to leave gifts in their wills. Dealing with death is never an easy matter, and charities can't benefit from a legacy until somebody has actually died. So it's always going to be a slightly tricky subject to discuss, but one that can be done sensitively and with care and with thought towards where the donor or the potential donor is coming from. And I'll come back to that in a moment. The next key thing to think about is about future impact. And in our charities at the moment, cash flow is the key issue. Cash is king, and lack of cash is the major challenge in survival and finding a way ahead. But legacies aren't necessarily the main solution to be able to help you to do that. And asking for legacy giving or asking for legacies to help you in an emergency situation can work on occasions, but is not really the way to go. So the important thing to think about is what future impact will your charity create that could use a legacy donation in order to make that happen. Emma mentioned earlier about one of the motivations being a positive vision from the charity, and she also talked about symbolic immortality. And when donors think about their own symbolic immortality, they're not really expecting that anything's going to happen very soon. They often think about their legacy being something which will benefit an organization in a generation's time, in sort of 20 or 30 years. None of us, even if we're older, really expecting that if we leave a legacy that it's going to be drawn down very, very quickly. So you need to think about the long term, talk about the future impact, and approach legacy giving in that way. And at the same time, as you think about future impact, it's very much about the change that you can bring for future beneficiaries through legacies. So it's also important not to focus on how a legacy could benefit your charity at this point in time. It's important to focus on how a legacy could bring positive change to future beneficiaries of your charity. Talk about those beneficiaries, focus on how those beneficiaries can benefit. See, Carl's put some comments in the chat about a community gym that he's involved in running, and so it's thinking about how will people in 10 or 15 years time potentially be benefiting at that gym if a legacy was left for them. How could it grow? How could it be a better, a more sustainable organization, a more community-led organization through legacies which will land at some point in the future. And then the fourth thing to consider is that it's okay to put your affairs in order. It's okay for all of us to manage our affairs, and estate planning is another word for legacy fundraising in the US. And estate planning what will happen to your estate is an important thing. And as through the terror management theory concepts, we're all a bit more, we have higher mortality salience, as the technical term goes. We're more aware of our mortality at the moment through coronavirus. It's even easier maybe to explain the benefits of putting your affairs in order and helping people to put their affairs in order as a charity fundraiser. So actually, by talking about legacies and getting people to plan ahead, it helps them to do something which many of them want to do, particularly the owls, and you are actually helping and adding value and providing a real service by helping people to think about what they might do, what they might put in their legacies, or within their wills, and what legacies they might leave to charities. So those are some sort of thoughts that we had in terms of how you might position your legacy asks right now. But I think we move over to our panel discussion, Emma, and have a quick introduction of our panel, and then we go into some questions and then a bit of a Q&A. Just one housekeeping thing before. Do you want to bring up the names of the panelists, Emma? One housekeeping thing. When you're sending a message in the chat, I think you have the option to choose it, whether it goes to either all panelists or all panelists and attendees. If you want to choose all panelists and attendees, then everybody gets to see it. And then when we have conversations afterwards, the relevance of the answers that we're giving will become a bit clearer. So if you can choose all panelists and attendees when you send stuff in the chat, or if you put it in the Q&A, then we'll also all be able to see it. So I'm delighted to have and Q&A is the better place to put stuff than chat as well. We're more likely to see it there. So I'm delighted to welcome to our panel Sean, Tracy, and Sampreet. So I think what we do is we'll drop the slideshow now, and we'll just go to pictures of our panelists. I can see Sean there. I don't know whether I've got the right way to see everybody. So sorry, I'm doing this a little bit blind because
I can see everyone down. I think.
Great, thank you. Thanks very much. I can't because I've had to come in through a browser rather than a normal way through, and it's the new Microsoft browser, which I don't really like. Okay, so thank you, Sean, Tracy, and Sampreet for joining us, and I think what we'll do is I'll just introduce each of you very briefly, and then ask you to, after I've introduced you, to just say a few words about what's been happening in your charity over the last 6 months with legacy fundraising and how coronavirus has impacted that. So perhaps we'll kick off with Tracy. So Tracy, as we said at the beginning, is from Rennie Grove Hospice Care, Director of Fundraising there, and organisation quite close to me where I live in St Albans, and one I've been involved with for a while. So it's great that Tracy brings experience of the hospice movement to our talk now. She's been at Sue Ryder Care, and she's also worked for the National Rheumatoid Arthritis Society in the past as well. So she has a good background in charity fundraising. And do you want to explain a little bit now, Tracy, about what's been happening for Rennie Grove's legacy fundraising over the last 6 months?
Sure. Hi to everyone. For us and the hospice sector generally, I think it's maybe slightly different in that things haven't changed enormously for us because legacies are part of our everyday work. By the nature of what we do, we deal with death all the time, and therefore legacies are always an integral part of what we're doing. So in terms of the last 6 months, we have carried on as normal. And I know that, in the sector, there's been quite a lot of sensitivity around should people be talking about legacies at a time when death is so prevalent through COVID. But actually for us, we feel that it's business as usual, and we have continued to do what we do in the same sensitive, careful way that we would always do it. We haven't changed what we're doing. And in actual fact, we've not seen any great change in terms of legacies notifications that are coming into us. So I suppose for us, it's business as usual. Nothing has changed considerably.
Okay, so that's quite interesting, and it'd be interesting to know how that resonates with other people who are listening into this. Just to, has it changed? Has there been an impact? And also, what are you thinking about over for the next 6 months as well, in terms of will there be any future changes or not? Perhaps we go to Sampreet next. So Sampreet is from the Awards for Young Musicians, and I was delighted to have Sampreet on this webinar as well, to bring a perspective from the arts and cultural side of things. We don't legacy fundraising for some arts and cultural organisations is a fairly new discipline, but at Awards for Young Musicians, it's something they've been doing for some while, which is good. And Sampreet gave was part of a webinar a couple of weeks ago for the RAISE program for the Institute of Fundraising Cultural Sector Network, talking to many people about what's happening in the cultural sector for fundraising. It's a really interesting area to be working in. So, Sampreet, do you want to say a little bit about the last 6 months in particular, and perhaps later on we'll learn a bit more about the history of Awards for Young Musicians and your links to legacies. But for now, just to focus on the last 6 months.
Yeah, so before lockdown, fundraising and events and concerts were a core part of our strategy, and that was both to find new supporters and to steward existing donors as well. And at these events, we're very much focused on bringing higher level regular donors on board. But though, of course, legacies are always mentioned in our pitches and our print materials, we haven't actually done any legacy specific events before either. So lockdown and coronavirus hasn't really impacted our legacy program in a way it may have done for other charities. And we've not actually needed to adapt that much. But we were still keen to keep speaking about legacies and in memory giving where possible. So we've just kind of, continued as normal. One thing is that we do often take the soft sort of drip approach to legacies, and we haven't, at least recently, made any direct asks to specific prospects. But we, as I said, we ensure that there is always an option in marketing print on our website, so that so people know that it is a way to give, and we basically let people get in touch with us if they are interested. And because of the pandemic and the sensitive nature of legacies, I don't imagine that we will be directly approaching people for legacies anytime soon. At the start of the pandemic, we were doing fairly well with legacies, and we currently have 19 legacy pledges. In fact, we received quite a large substantial gift from a will in late 2019. In this case, we weren't a named charity in the will, but the pledger wanted to leave a gift to support music education. Once their family did the research, they found us and they contacted me. We then carefully stewarded the family over 6 months or so and received the legacy. And we are now remaining in contact with that family and treat them as our donors, and we give them very clear examples and stories about how their parents' gift is making a difference to young musicians. We've also seen how the pandemic meant that our supporters were looking at their affairs and making plans for the future. So one donor who had only very recently established a regular gift got in touch to ask about leaving a gift in his will and for some specific advice about wording. And after that, we're now a named charity in his will. So I would say that the pandemic did sort of cement his intention to leave a legacy, but the nurturing and the stewarding of that supporter started years ago when we first met. So overall, we're at a stage in just our wider charities development where we're focusing on building our reach and our audience as not being as we don't necessarily have a ready-made audience. So lockdown has in many ways given us this opportunity to focus on digital engagement more, to not just steward existing supporters, but to find new prospects who we can sort of take through the legacy journey.
Okay, great, thank you. That's interesting. We might pick up on the sort of the digital stuff a bit later, and I see somebody's put in a question about that as well. And then last but not least, Sean. So Sean is Director of Fundraising at the Soldiers Charity. Sean and I have known each other many years, so I'm very pleased to drag him onto a webinar with me. And it'd be great to hear from Sean just in terms of what the Soldiers Charity has been doing, if you've been doing anything different in particular, and what your experience of coronavirus has been on how you talk about legacies and how your donors are talking about legacies with you.
Thanks very much, Dan. We've, I think like many people, we've not significantly adapted our legacy marketing during this period. We usually have an income of between £3 to £6 million a year from legacies, which in over the last 10 years or so has occasionally gone up to about 40% of our annual income. So it's a very important part of our fundraising. But having said that, we've only had a legacy marketing function for about the last 4 years. And believe me, it took a lot of persuasion of the trustees to actually put in place a significant marketing budget, because it was something that always happened slightly under the radar. It happened almost incidentally to the rest of our marketing work. But what have we done since coronavirus? Well, actually, we've done much the same as we would always do. A lot of our advertising is hard copy advertising, full page, full color, in the very specific Army family related publications such as Soldier, Army and You, Regimental Association magazines. We've supplemented that with very small, very targeted segments of our existing donors, where we've taken a small chunk of the cash donor file and we've written to them and said, would you be interested in pledging? And that has actually been quite successful. Over the last 6 months, we've had a significant number of pledges come through. To give some context to that, we have around 70 pledges, 70 notifications a year. And again, to give context in actual cash terms to that, our average pecuniary legacy is about £10,000. Our average residuary legacy is just over £60,000. So in some ways, none of this is extraordinary stuff, but I think we haven't altered our position. We've continued to be sensitive, but we're probably speaking to an audience which is far more switched on to the idea of service and duty and supporting the long term than some other audiences.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think something it'll be interesting to come back to in the conversation a bit later on is the appetite of different donors to give, and also how that donor appetite has been changed with coronavirus as well. Okay, so thank you everybody for your opening thoughts. We've got a few questions in the Q&A bit. So what we'll do is we'll go through them one by one, I think. Peter Voss sort of starts it off by saying the problem to solve is how to get our charity prioritized over the many thousands of others when it comes to legacy giving, which is I guess a problem shared by everybody. Maybe a few of you might like to throw in some thoughts on that. Perhaps I might jump in straight. First of all, with Sampreet, you talked about audiences being a challenge with you, and that you don't have necessarily a ready-made legacy audience, but you'd been trying to do some things in the digital realm. So, do you have any tips on or any thoughts on how you reach those sorts of people who actually would respond positively to your legacy message, as opposed to the whole population, many of whom I guess won't, because they don't know your charity and they don't have a connection?
I'd say, yeah, when we're kind of persuading people that your charities want to leave a legacy to rather than a competitor, is it's everything to do with your comms, isn't it? So it's really needing to make sure that your fundraising strategy and your communication strategy is aligned, and you have those close links with whoever is running your communications and your marketing. I think a lot of it depends on when someone is looking for a charity to make a donation to, what are they going to Google, and how do they and where do you then end up on that list? I mean, for us, we sometimes do have conversations about changing our name and whether it sort of fits everything that we do. But then we realise when people want to find out about helping young musicians, we will be there at the top of any sort of list. So I think that really makes a difference, just having a presence in whatever sort of community you're working with. And so and definitely taking advantage of things like Google's ad grants, so that you are receiving free advertising online, is really useful as well.
Great.
Can I just add, in terms of Peter's point, it's sort of looking at your donor journey as well. So your bread and butter are going to be actually your existing donors. So, you know, the point I made in the presentation is it might not be relevant for all charities, but those kind of in memory givers are going to be your kind of target audience for prospective legators. So making sure that you can kind of pick out those people that are more likely to give you a legacy, and then just making sure that there's a donor journey there that can move them to the point where they feel inspired and you know and want to make that commitment.
Tracy, Sean, do you want to jump in at all? Or?
Yeah, I think certainly within the hospice sector, that's absolutely the case, Emma, very, very definitely. And around 80% of the legacies that we get left are from people that are known to us. So it's a really high percentage. And of that 80%, the majority will have experienced our care either directly or indirectly. So there's a very, very clear correlation between people who have used the service, benefited from it, and it's that symbolic immortality wants to be remembered. And there's also within the hospice sector, I think, almost that feeling of it's a bit of an insurance policy. If I make sure that I leave something for the future, they'll be there for me and for others who might need it. And I think for us, that's certainly one of the ways that we can really emphasize that impact and the difference it makes by leaving a gift, because we can talk about that future and the number of patients that we can care for, the services we can provide. So I think that the donor journey is absolutely key. And Sean, you probably talk a bit more about this segmenting that you've done, but for us, that's something that we're just beginning to look at in much more detail now, about actually who are those really hot prospects, if you like, that we really have got to be taking on that much closer, more involved donor journey than we are at the moment. Because that's how we will grow the legacy income and grow our profile, where we'll be the charity of choice. We'll be the first choice that people think of rather than the fourth or the fifth.
Dan, can I just pick up on two of the points that's been raised there? I think on the not known to us piece, when we look at our legacy pledges and the actual legators, they broadly speaking split into two groups. There is the vast majority of our legators, we have absolutely no idea why they've given to us. They're not known.
A quite complete contrast to Tracy's experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly. They're not known to us. However, when you actually look at the wills, which, you know, I usually spend a chunk of Friday afternoon looking at people's wills, which is heck of a way to spend a Friday, but it's really informative. You can see that there is a distinct pattern where, and I'm sort of simplifying wildly here, there will be a grouping of legators who are very obviously giving to every single person that they give a regular cash gift to. So they will give to maybe 12 or 20 charities, and we are just one of those charities. Or they will be giving to 2 or 3 charities, and again, wildly oversimplifying, there will be a regimental charity, there will be us, and there will be somebody like SAFA. So it will be either a dozen or 2 or 3. The other group that we see giving to us are very, very clearly people who have been long-term cash supporters. So they've been giving us quite small cash gifts, quite frequent cash gifts, small cash gifts of £3 or £4 to every single appeal. But then we actually get a share of the house. which is interesting. So we do get that residuary legacy coming through. Just picking up, I think Mohammed was asking a question on the segmentation piece. We absolutely look for those people who are characterized, and the pledges who are coming through from our mailings are people who've given us a long-standing cash gift. They're very responsive cash donors, or they are people who've signed up to either a standing order or a direct debit. And it's very clear that those are the people who are biting on the legacy offer.
Yeah.
So there's something around the longevity, isn't there? There is definitely
Absolutely.
something around whether people have been involved either, as you say, at that very low level of just giving £3 or £4 a month, which in the scheme of things we would probably not take much notice of. But actually the longevity of that support translates into that much bigger gift at the end. And I think that's really key and really important. We shouldn't take our eyes off of those people who probably fall into our, oh, they're a small donor, we shouldn't be worrying about them too much. Actually, they could be our lifeblood going forward.
They generally are, and as I say, those people may very well be supporting 10 or 12 charities in that same way. But one then gets a 10th share of a £250,000 property, and that is not insignificant income.
No, absolutely.
I think that sort of points to a direction of making sure that kind of legacy marketing is everywhere it can be, really, because you just never know where it's going to come from. So kind of all of the newsletters, if you have newsletters to your supporters, making sure that there's, I mean, it can be subtle, it doesn't need to be everything on there, but just making sure that people know that that's an option, and that it's important to the charity. I
think you're right, Emma. And just picking up on the digital side that Sanpreet was talking to, it can be as simple as we often have internal fights in the charity as to who gets the email sign off for that month, and it can be as simple as having the email footer talking about legacies for the month of January. It can be that simple, and if we actually monitor our intenders against when we've put a legacy sign off on emails, there is actually quite a high correlation against that.
Yeah. Okay. So people are reading those.
They do read them.
About drip earlier, which is sort of the terminology we often use for that, getting those legacy messages, squeezing them in all sorts of different ways. So do you have any interesting ways that or examples that where you've done that, or how do you balance the drip of legacy fundraising against all the other ways that you want people to give?
I think for us, it's exactly as Sean said, it's continual. So it's there on everything. And it may, as you say, just be an email footer. It may just be a line that runs along the bottom of the pages in our twice yearly newsletter. It doesn't have to be a big story or a huge piece. It's just that constantly keep making sure it's in people's mind's eye is the important thing, that it pops up on your feed on your website regularly, that periodically in your e-newsletters you're just putting something in about legacies. It is very much for us a continual drip to just keep reminding people.
It comes down, I think, to the socialization of the legacy message, and that it's actually okay to start talking about death, and the fact that mortality affects us all. And when you build that into and I think Dan touched on this earlier, you talk about the impact of those gifts, whether it's in the relatively short term, i.e. 3 to 4 years, or whether you're actually talking against the longer term sustainability of the charity. In our case, one of the messages that we put in there is very much based around, we've been here for 75 years. With your support, we will still be here in 75 years. And it's building into that really sort of sense of, commitment for the future. And I think in something like Sanpreet's case, there is an argument that if you support a young musician of 21, 22 now, that young musician will become an old musician, and in 30, 40 years will be teaching and influencing other young musicians. And it's trying to put the thing into a context. You know, a legacy is not a single gift that impacts at a single point of time. It's something which impacts the future, whatever that future looks like.
Yeah, and that's where the symbolic immortality concept sort of really has strength. Sampri, do you want to say a little bit about your example of your charity and its how it started from a legacy, and how that you can talk about that to help socialize or normalize the concept of leaving a legacy?
Yeah, so so award-winning musicians, so legacies have always been quite a key part of us and our fundraising since we were founded in 1998. So AYM was actually started by a bequest from a man called Robert Lewin. He had a large instrument collection, and he instructed in his will that he wanted it to be used to support talented young musicians, specifically from low-income families, because he was once one himself. It was then his nephew, our founding trustee, Michael Lewin, who used the funds from auctioning those instruments to establish AYM. And I think that puts us in a really nice position where we can actually have a reason to talk about legacies, because we're talking about what made AYM happen. And it also means that we have a very sort of good impact story to tell straight away. So it was this man's gift who has now supported over 3,000 young musicians. So imagine what your gift might achieve as well.
Thank you.
Dan, can I just chip in on that?
Yeah.
I think one of the things that we've found quite helpful on our side is we've used live legacy ambassadors in our stories. So we've gone out when somebody has made a pledge. We have talked to them and we've said, would you be happy for us to use your story and talk about why you've left a gift in your will to this charity? And that's incredibly powerful, because Samprit's just illustrated the fact of how a legacy has established and made an organization what it is and created the organization. To talk to somebody who's still alive and says, actually, do you know what? You're in my will. Here we are. This is why I've left the legacy. This is why I believe in your organization. That's an enormously powerful story.
We do a lot of that as well. So currently on our website we have there's one sort of longer form case study or sort of blog from a current pledger who's talking about what made her first of all what made her donate to AYM, and then what made her commit to leaving a legacy. And a lot of it we sort of so the blog was written by me after an interview with this pledger, of course, so I was able to sort of weave in the facts that we want to give and sort of take away any misconceptions that people might have. So in the blog she's talking about how easy it was to do and the reasons that she wants to give. And then we also have a quote from a relatively younger person, I guess, who's in her 40s, who normally isn't our sort of target for when we're thinking about legacies, talking about what made her and her husband decide to leave a gift to us as well. And yeah, exactly like Sean says, I think having those living examples really normalizes the idea of giving a gift in your will as well.
Yeah, and we do exactly the same. And we also 2 years ago, when we completely redesigned all our legacy materials, we brought together a small group of those people who had told us they'd left a gift in their will. And we actually involved them in helping form what should those materials look like, what sort of wording should we use, how should we be talking about it. So not only using their stories, but actually saying, as someone who's given, what would inspire you to give? You tell us what inspired you to give, so that we can use that for other people. And I think that's really powerful and really, really important.
Yeah, I think that is really, really important, because I don't think we as fundraisers will fully understand why people give until we actually speak to them about what their reasons are, and we might have our own theories about why should someone to leave a legacy to us, but until we actually hear from a pledger what it is that you mean to them or your cause means to them, yeah, that's the language that we need to know, and then repeat back to other people who might be wanting to make a gift.
Thank you. And there have been a few comments about use of sensitive language, I suppose, and how you couch legacy asks. And I think those pieces of advice from you in terms of hearing from your donors and understanding their motivations and the language that they use is of paramount importance, so that you're I really like the sort of the mantra, "You are not your donor," and it's often used in direct marketing to remember that people who are composing direct marketing materials are probably not the same sorts of people as the ones who will respond to them. So and there's often a generation gap in between, at least. So you need to think, how would your donor respond to this bit of DM, rather than how would I respond to it? And it's exactly the same with legacy marketing, that you're not your donor. You need to find your donors and talk to them and understand what motivates them and how they talk, and which things are sensitive to them, and also which things aren't sensitive to them as well. And the whole idea of as people get older, they actually do want to set their affairs in order. It becomes of more paramount importance, and actually that's just good housekeeping and a practical thing that they need to get on with, and you can talk to them in quite pragmatic language rather than being afraid of using the D word. Yeah, it's important. There have been a few other questions around virtual stewardship events and sort of virtual, or how we get messages across about legacies in the digital realm, particularly if our legacy supporters don't necessarily want to use technology. I'm not entirely sure how true that is, that legacy supporters don't want to use technology. Some might not, some might. But do the panel have any thoughts on the sort of the virtual realm and how we do legacy marketing in that realm? Just jump in. I
mean, we've always had it as a feature on the website. We've always mentioned it in e-newsletters. We have our printed newsletter that goes out twice a year in the mail. So I think it's there for people to find. It's there for people to access. The information is all there. There's a way of asking, you can email to ask a question to a specific, we have a specific legacy inbox, so people can feel that it's going, the whole team aren't all going to read it. It can be quite sensitive and secure. So I think in the virtual space, it's been happening anyway for us. I wouldn't say that we've had to change anything, because it's always been an integral part of our legacy program, has been that not only is it in printed form, everything is there online as well.
Yeah, we've always tried to make it very, since we've been actively marketing, we've tried to make the journey onto the leaving a will page on our website as simple and as few clicks as possible. It's not always worked, but we do, we try and mirror everything that we've got, that we would send out on the written in sort of hard copy form into our website. And we've tried to do some pieces around books of remembrance and similar, just to drive people who want to talk about loved ones and then give them the opportunity to think about leaving a gift in their will. Because I think, as we all would probably appreciate, there's always a lot of debate about how we actually steward and manage the families of our legators. And I know some people have probably done this far more successfully than we have, but it's a pretty hard ask, because for most of us, when we deal with a legator, we're dealing them remotely, secondhand, through a lawyer, And it is very unusual to talk to a member of the family. And I think Sanpreet mentioned earlier, there is a huge opportunity to talk to the family, and talking to the family about the charity will then, if it's done correctly, will then actually create, you get this ripple effect, you get a bow wave, which reaches out beyond the legacy. And of course, you then don't know how successful that is, but it's good practice to manage it.
Yeah.
Okay, there's a number of questions that are coming up in the chat around sort of virtual events as well, as well as sort of virtual marketing. Do any of in our panel have any particular comments on how you do how you replace the face-to-face stuff with the virtual when it comes to stewardship?
I mean, we haven't done it yet for our legacy pledges, but we've held 2 Zoom meetings with small groups of major donors, who we would normally, you know, they're the sort of supporters you would always normally meet face to face in a very personal atmosphere. We've done it in very small groups. We've drawn in the chair of the trustees and our director of nursing, so senior members of the team who are part of that Zoom call, who can talk, you know, and so it feels as if you're still in the room with those people. It still has that personal feel because it's small. You've got those people there in front of you to ask any questions you want to ask of. And it's been incredibly well received and very, very successful. To our surprise, I have to say, I think when we first did it, we thought this is never going to work. People aren't going to want to do this. We'll ask people if they'd like it and they'll say, no, thanks. Actually, they've been really keen. So we will certainly continue with that. And, you know, legacy pledges are in that list of people that we will start to plan to do that with. So it's worked very well for us. Hasn't been an issue. I don't know if others have done anything similar or not.
We've kind of had the opposite, where there hasn't really been much of a appetite from our supporters to want to meet virtually at all, so they're just not into this whole Zoom thing. And you know, a lot of it might be to do with if they are still working, they don't want to necessarily be on a video call afterwards. But really what our supporters are missing are our live events, where they can actually be in the same room as a young musician and hear them perform. And it's you just can't quite do the same thing. Like for us, we wanted to recreate the sort of the reception part of it, and that's what we thought we could necessarily use Zoom for, but it's not what people come to us for really. But what's been good for us is just picking up the phone, I think, and this is for our donors and our legacy pledges as well. Just so we did it at the start of lockdown, just giving everyone a call, checking in, seeing how they are. That was a task split between me, our chief exec, and our chair of trustees. And you know, with the recent announcements around COVID, we'll be doing that in the next month as well. So I think, even if there isn't necessarily an appetite to steward people virtually, if you do have the time and you know their information, just give them a call and see how they are. And I think many people would appreciate that one-to-one contact more.
I absolutely agree with that. What we found with the stewardship of both our sort of legators' families and our pledges is that we've been having real-time telephone conversations with them, and we've very much been encouraging them to email photographs and pictures of medal groups and all of that sort of stuff across to us. And that has given us it's given us some wonderful digital assets that we can actually use with permission in future campaigns, because people are actually crying out to share stories with us about their loved ones. And we get some absolutely marvelous pictures, we get some marvelous stories, but that is about having the right attitude at point of contact with your supporter care. And we have a individual giving team of 3, so it's not a huge team. And our supporter care person can be doing everything from writing thank you letters to taking calls from people who want to support us via a legacy. So this is not something that relies on having a huge team. It's having a team with the right attitude and the right messaging and the right approach.
Great. We've got to 5 o'clock, so thank you to the panel for the contributions, and that's quite a good note to finish on in some way, Sean, that it is about the right approach. It's about wanting to do the right thing for your donors. There are still a few questions which have been unanswered. So Emma, do you want to flash up the summary page, and then we'll just do that.
You see it? Just should be able to see it now. Yeah.
Yeah, if you could, yeah, that would do. So just some things to think about, that mortality salience is affecting people at the moment, so respond accordingly, but that could help you. People will have a bit more time to think about your causes at the moment as well, so maybe if you can put the time into them, then that could help you with your legacy marketing. And legacy marketing is an important thing to continue to do, because it is still working, it is still paying off for many charities, and it continues to be a very important source of charitable income. So I think what we do is we say, if you want to leave us at this point, feel free. We'll hang on for a few minutes just to go through the remaining Q&A bits, just so that that we do deal with the questions that people have asked. Thank you for being here, and we hope it's been useful. So as the numbers dwindle, which is fine. Just there are a couple of questions, I think maybe in the chat about free will writing services. How effective are free will writing services in generating legacy pledges? Will just do any of the panel have any views on that? I think, Tracy, that's something that you do at Rennie Grove, isn't it?
We've only just started to do it. So I haven't really I couldn't really say to you whether it's been successful, unsuccessful, or not at the moment. I think.
But it's something you thought it's worth.
We've always done Make Your Will Month each year, where local solicitors support the charity by writing a will effectively free of charge for someone, and that person then makes a donation back to us for that service. We're looking much more at the online will writing now, because obviously in the current climate, either solicitors are not meeting people face to face, or people don't want to go out and meet face to face. But as we talked about earlier, people are much more aware of their own mortality. They want to get their affairs in order. So we are going to trial that and see what take up we get from that, and whether that's a service that people really want to be able to use, and what impact that has on our notifications.
Yeah.
Dan, we use the Free Wills Network. We've only been using it for the last 3 or 4 years. We know there has been a take-up, because obviously we get the stats on that, but obviously we don't get any detail on, we know, and one of the joys of the Free Wills Network is we simply do not know what's going to come through in 4 or 5 years' time. But, we believe in offering that service, and we do promote the service. And I think, if anybody's in doubt about should they or shouldn't they use Free Wills Network, I would say absolutely yes, sign up, because generally it is another option. So I'd recommend people look at that as one of their channels.
Yeah, it doesn't it? So another question was around giving societies. So do you use legacy giving as part of a giving society? How might that function, and does such a society motivate people to join? That's something I have seen in past charities where I've been working. Haven't had much recent experience of that as a model. I think it works for some particular types of charities, perhaps more than others. Perhaps in the education field, it might be a bit more effective. And I did some work for a private school that wanted to set up a giving society for their old boy network, essentially, as their old boy network became older boys. So I think it can work, but you need to have that concept of community around your organisation to start off with. I don't know whether any of the panelists have other views or similar views to that. Or
again, like you, Dan, I've come across that in working in education fundraising. I don't think that, personally, I don't think there's much read across into other sort of charitable sectors.
Fair enough. Sampreet, sorry, thank you for joining, and thank you for leaving your details there if people want to contact you. So thank you for that. You've been great on here. Final questions, I think, around as a complete novice, what should people do to start off with talking about legacies? What initial steps do you take?
I was
Shall I go with this one?
But somebody's going to jump in there, so I can.
I was just going to mention that there are, just before you, Sean, that there are sort of various legacy forums which we can share the details of later. So someone's a complete novice might benefit from sort of being part of those forums with other sort of people that have been doing legacy fundraising for a long time. And there's also Remember a Charity as well. Yeah. I think it's probably worth mentioning. Sean, you can go ahead now.
All I was going to say is that I think one of the key things that we've not really touched on is how one sells this internally to one's own trustees. Because there is obviously a degree of investment required, and I think one of the interesting exercises we did a few weeks ago or a few months ago was actually going around our own senior management board and asking people, have they made a will? And if so, when was the last time they updated it? And the outcome was absolutely horrendous. I think there were only 2 people in a room of 12 who had actually got an up-to-date will. I was one of them. But I think talking to one's trustees and one's peers about what legacies mean to them is often quite a key indicator of how legacies should be taken forward in the organisation. And I would always encourage anybody who is not doing legacy fundraising to have that internal conversation first to find out what the sort of mood music is towards it. And has it ever been a conversation? Ask the question.
Yeah, I think it's about normalising it. I think, isn't it? That legacies are. It's another way that people can support your charity. It's another way of giving, and we shouldn't be shy about talking about it. That it's something that you leave that will happen after you've died. Actually, that's okay. And if you normalise it and talk about it in that sensitive but very normal way, becomes much easier to talk about it. It shouldn't really be any different to talking to people about legacies than it is talking about regular giving or a cash appeal. It's another way of giving.
I also think if anyone out there is involved in legacy marketing, a really good way of getting an insight is actually to go out there and kind of attempt to do a will yourself, obviously going to a solicitor, but you'll kind of get a feel of actually what an individual has to do when they kind of go and then go through the process and potentially leave a donation to a charity. I think that produces quite a useful insight into people that are actually in the game of having to try and convince other people to do the same thing.
Yeah, very wise words, Emma. Thank you. So I think it's now 5:10. I think we've covered off most of the questions. There are some emails in the chat function if anybody wants to follow up, and do feel free to get in contact with us. We'll be sending around a follow-up email either today or probably more likely tomorrow, just to with a bit of with the slide deck and video and a few further links which will be useful. So do feel free to respond to that if you want to know any more or think any more about legacy fundraising, or indeed any other types of fundraising that we could help you with. So thanks very much to Sean, Tracy and Sampreet. And thank you for joining us today as well. It's been really great.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks very much. Bye.